Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. Lovely to have you back after a week. We thought we'd just get a wee different entry there, just some of the topics we're hoping to cover today. I hope you and yours are well, and you've had a great week. I certainly have here in sunny downtown Dubai. It's been great. Weather's fabulous, just to make you all feel worse. I hear the weather's not so good back home, but it's great to be with you. Lots to talk about. And unfortunately, our friend Phil Boswell can't join us today. He's, as we speak, in mid-flight between North Dakota and Dallas. I think they're getting him out. What did he say? It was minus 28 or something last week. So I think they're moving him to warmer times. But he'll be back with us next week, hopefully. Well, and his usual chirpy, cheery self. But I am joined this week by, from Clackmannanshire, our Eva Comrie. Eva, how are you, my friend?
In good form, thank you, Roddy. I'm just back from meeting the Forth Valley feminists who are having their conference in Alloa today. So I'd urge all our viewers to watch the Forth Valley feminists on Twitter and on YouTube over the course of the next few days when videos of some fantastic speeches from today will be shown.
Well done. Well done to the ladies. Well done to you. And we're also joined actually up in Aberdeen. There's with our Yvonne, who's up there campaigning to help Charlie Abel get elected, but we're having some problems with Eva's camera. So we shall have our dear friend in voice only until hopefully something technical miracle happens. Yvonne, hello, my friend. How are you?
Hello, I'm fine, barring technology. And Eva's speech today, I'm told, was absolutely rip-roaring. And Holyrood Mandy said that you were talking about simply telling the truth is an act of revolution these days, Eva. So I can't wait to hear the speech. I'm sure there'll be a copy of it somewhere.
Yes, indeed. I mean, someone said, "Oh, a brilliant speech by Eva." I went, who's surprised? I'm not. But we are joined. I don't know if we should all sit at attention or we should have a roll of the drums. But we're joined by the man of the moment, and our good friend to the show, Neale Hanvey MP. Neale, my friend, welcome. How are you, sir? Should I sit at attention?
Very well, Roddy. Hi, Eva. Hi, Yvonne.
A Benny Hill salute. Will that do? A Benny Hill salute, do you? We're delighted, and we're going to be spending a lot of time, Neale, talking about the fantastic piece of work you did this week. Not that you don't do fantastic work every week, but particularly your 10-minute self-determination bill. But it would be remiss of us, and although I want to spend as little time as possible on this, but 5 hours after our very long discussions last week, there was a U-turn by the government, and Adam Graham was removed from Compton Vale Prison. I don't know how much it had to do with our Prism show, but we'll take whatever reflected glory we can get. But I'm delighted for our society, for the ladies in Compton Vale, and for sense that he was removed. Eva, it was the right thing to do to remove him. It was the wrong thing to have put him there in the first place.
He should never have been there. Nobody on the planet believes that he should have been there. And the Scottish Government have a lot to answer for. As you said already, Roddy, there's been a U-turn. Well, I think there's been more than one U-turn this week. They are in complete disarray. You've got the spectacle of a Justice Minister, a First Minister, and the MP for Stirling, Alan Smith, all refusing to be drawn in relation to what is a woman and what's this whole debacle been about. They are all, Alan Smith, of course, remaining silent when he's usually pretty vociferous. But you've got a government who maintain that the starting point in these matters is the default position, which is trans women are women, and how offensive that is to women. So I look forward to further clarity later in the week, when I understand the Justice Minister is going to have to be accountable to the Scottish Parliament and explain the content of the lessons learned report being conducted by the Scottish Prison Service. But let's make no mistake, the Scottish Government tried to pass the buck to the Scottish Prison Service when Adam Graham first went to Cornton Vale. They then appeared to have taken control by ensuring his removal from there. But they didn't bother their backsides last year when Katie Dolitovsky was in Cornton Vale. I was with a group of women who demonstrated in November last year at that outside Cornton Vale as Katie Dolitovsky was there. There was very little publicity and there was no action, none, nothing, not a jot by the Scottish Government and no comment by the First Minister. And that person was a registered sex offender with convictions against young children and was in Cornton Vale on remand as the result of having assaulted a male prisoner whilst in a male establishment. So it's very, very clear that the rights and the feelings and the views of female prisoners, female prison officers, are secondary in the eyes of the Scottish Government, unless and until there is adverse publicity, at which point suddenly they sit up and pretend to take a little notice.
Yep, it wouldn't be a prison without a dog barking. It just wouldn't be. We have that every week. But something that concerned me slightly, Neale, was the following day after the U-turn and they removed these people. It was Keith Brown, the Justice Secretary, saying, well, we will not be changing a single thing in the bill, which means that they did this, it would seem, or am I being unfair, it seemed as if it was because of the moment that they were uncomfortable and they did this to appease the masses, but with no intention, tomorrow or next week or whenever, when it's died down, got quiet, they'll just go back to normal. And people like this, Adam Graham, or the other one, Andrew Burns, who's even worse, will be back into the women's estate. Am I being too cynical?
No, I think for those of us who have been aware of this issue for a number of years, that's really everybody on the call. What really bothers me the most is that this was completely foreseeable. It has all been warned about. I've made it clear I've warned Shirley Ann Somerville about Katie Dolitovsky and his, I don't know what his real name is, the risk that he posed to women and children, and also the damage that he was causing, his behaviour was causing to trans rights, because he has been labelled in the media as a trans woman when he's not. He's a sexual predator. He's a paedophile. And we shouldn't confer any cloak of acceptability to predators who commit these absolutely horrific crimes. The fact that, this has become such a divisive issue in the party comes from the very top and now in the country. And most of us who are, want to be focused on independence have been absolutely clear that this is the wrong cause to be championing because it will not resonate with the public. And what a big surprise. But there are a number of very serious questions that are still to be answered. Who authorised the redirection of Adam Graham from Barlinnie to Cornton Vale? That decision has not been explained as far as I'm concerned. Why are organisations that have been funded on the condition that they embrace the Scottish Government's inclusive policies, why are they in a position to make judgment and a pronouncement on what is of an acceptable nature or not? They are absolutely compromised. We know that many public bodies have been captured by this. But women's safeguarding, that argument, I think, has been won. The public are onto this. They will not accept this fiction that is being trotted out, that these dangerous individuals, these dangerous men, are women. They are not. They are predators, and they're using a very bad policy from the Scottish Government to cover their tracks. But what it also requires us to do is to begin to look at the other areas of policy that this impacts, and that is on children's safeguarding, not from necessarily predators in that regard, but from organisations that have been captured by an ideology that promises them salvation through bodily mutilation and irreversible hormone therapy. These things have to be named, and they have to be called out. And the last point I would make is, if we are to make a serious bid for independence, yes, of course, we need to put independence front and centre, but we have to rebuild the confidence of the women who have been deeply affected by this dangerous policy. And the best way to do that is to ensure that all of the protections that have been at risk as part of this folly from the Scottish Government are enshrined in an independent Scotland's constitution, that they're not up for grab for any political ideology, and particularly not for anarchic, destructive policies like gender theory or queer theory.
Indeed. Yvonne, although we can't see you, my friend, we will get your pearls of wisdom now. It wasn't just the SNP Scottish Government that did a U-turn. It was kind of obvious that both the Labour Party MSPs and Alex Cole-Hamilton suddenly thought it was terrible that men should be housed in women's prisons. He thought, well, wait a minute, you voted down the amendments. The hypocrisy from so many is now been there exposed for everyone to see, Yvonne.
Well, it's a great irony, isn't it, that a double rapist trans woman is going to bring down Nicola Sturgeon and her barking mad government. You know, everybody knows I'm a Geordie, and the one things that Geordies have in common with Scots people is we love a good laugh, but we don't like being laughed at. And Nicola Sturgeon has single-handedly turned Scotland into a joke over this whole trans nonsense. And make no mistake about it, everything has crumbled because we've had sane politicians like Neale Hanvey shouting, you know, that the emperor's not wearing any clothes. We've had thousands of women across the UK, and especially in Scotland, led by the Women Won't Wish campaign, fighting the nonsense which has culminated in this double rapist being put into a Scottish woman's jail, prison. And because of all the protesting, and a lot of it has been led by Alipur, and certainly Eva has been very strident. She's been outside Cornton Vale calling it out. Because of that, this has all contributed to the crumbling of the GRR bill, which has taken Nicola Sturgeon and her acolytes 7 years to develop. 7 years of what? Of turning Scotland into a global joke. She really is finished now, and I'm sorry that Phil's not here with us, because I think he would be saying the same. But I'd like to hear more about Neale's epic adventure in Westminster this week.
Don't worry, that's going to be the main thrust of this programme, Eva.
Yeah.
I want to finish off this part of the show, Eva, two or three things. One, I noticed when the First Minister was questioned on television about, you know, is it a trans woman? She wouldn't answer the question now for years now, yourself and the rest of us who have said that, you know, trans women or not women, or not absolutely, have been getting slaughtered as homophobes, as racists, as fascists, and everything under the sun, marginalised, demonised. And there was the First Minister standing, well, yes, they're all trans, but yeah, not always. And she, the great communicator, when it was slightly exposed, but she also did, as did Jenny Gilruth, blame the Scottish Prison Service for this instead of saying, well, it was our idea. And Alan Smith, another great proponent of it, Eva, was another one who said, I don't want to talk about it. It doesn't stand up to scrutiny. And yet for 6-7 years, those of us who've been saying, this is not right, we've been the bad guys. They've been exposed.
It's the Empress has no clothes. We knew several years ago that James Morton, etc., were using prisons and prisoners as the guinea pigs or the canaries in the coal mine. And Neale and I both remember the first consultation on gender reform, where responses in the main were not published because the responses which came from within Scotland were not favourable. And it's very much to the credit of Neale and others around him a couple of years ago, and obviously for Women.Scot and various other feminist organisations since, that sunlight has been cast upon this, and that this minor administrative exercise, which was going to be sneaked through almost under the radar without proper scrutiny, has now been exposed for what it is. It's an ideology that has no place in Scotland, and it unravels, and there is dissembling once that sunlight is cast over the dark shadows that would otherwise be there. We've seen people like Alexander Cole Hamilton embarrass themselves by making grand gestures about for whose benefit this bill was passed. And the reality, the horrible reality, is that those politicians we elected to take us to independence got sidetracked onto something which is becoming a very shameful and international embarrassment, simply because we have politicians who feel or appear unable to be honest, direct, upfront, and just tell the truth. They've said over and over again that there is nothing to fear from self-identification, and that it is, as we've said, a minor administrative exercise, when the hard reality they know, when their own words are thrown back at them, is that self-identification is a very dangerous myth, because it does away with all the safeguards that women and children have needed throughout time, and which were created over the course of the past decades, and in the context of prisons, the last 200 years. You cannot build all these safeguards over that period of time and then throw them all away by simply pretending that a change of gender suddenly means that men who are predators do not remain so simply because they've chosen to change a gender. So what needs to happen, and I fear for Scotland's sake that it won't happen in the foreseeable future, but what needs to happen is the First Minister and those around her have to learn to face facts, and they have to say that trans women are male because they are. That is not a dog whistle. That is not hatred. It is a fact. A trans identifying male is male. And if there are issues for trans identifying males in male prisons, those should be addressed from a male perspective. That does not mean that people do not deserve anything other than dignity and safety and protection. But it also means that what is a man's problem should not become a problem for women, because women are not men's shields and they ought not to be treated as such. So I look forward to a debate with the First Minister or with the Justice Minister. Neale and I will take them on anytime, any place, anywhere. And let's talk facts, and let's talk about how to get Scotland back onto the right route again, and to really clear up the mess that this dishonest debacle and ideology has created, because it is bringing shame on our country and it's dividing us at a time when we need to be united, particularly in the light of Neale's presentation of his bill earlier this week.
Indeed. I just two things. One, I put an invite again, inviting anyone who supported the GRRB and the trans women prisoners and women's prison estate to come on this show to debate with us. Today, there's been nothing. But this bill is over. My advice, we're going to close it down now in this conversation and ongoing, I hope. And I would suggest to Nicola Sturgeon and the Scottish Government, accept that this bill is dead in the water. Go away and think again. Neale, without talking out of shop, we attended a meeting earlier today, and the first on the agenda, point number 1, was about independence. Point number 2 was about independence. Point number 3 on that agenda was about independence. Point 4 there was a sort of passing remark to this that we've just been discussing. And you, sir, this week did what all of us independence supporters wanted, and you went into the belly of the beast, can I call it, at Westminster, and you introduced your 10-minute bill, the self-determination bill. You've made our country proud, sir. It must have given you some great pleasure to be actually talking about what you went into politics for, like the rest of us, independence. Talk us through it.
Well, this is we had a meeting at the leadership meeting at the end of the year, and we, carved up what our priorities were going to be. And so securing a 10-minute rule bill slot was a priority to get to respond in a constructive way to the continued prevarication from the Scottish Government and the continued refusal from Westminster to just put forward a sensible proposal that, the UK government, through their UK Internal Markets Act, going about how we need to have equalised standards across the UK. And so if you're going to do that, you have to embrace that rationale through all areas of policy. So we decided to put forward this motion to ask for a very reasonable accommodation for the Scottish people that would give us a very clear pathway now and in the future to be able to consider our constitutional future. And so, my frustration recently has been that much of the debate in the chamber around Scotland is narrowly point scoring, a lot of shouting, not particularly helpful debate. And so I wanted to build on the case that I made in the St Andrew's Day speech in Westminster Hall, and to draw that out into the framing of that parity across the UK. And it was really useful because the people that I had alongside me from that chamber, reaching back through history, were, Margaret Thatcher, what's his name, the grey one, John Major. And Winston Churchill and Gladstone, and right back to 1889, talking about that unavoidable situation where each constituent part of the United Parliament, as they referred to it in those days, had the same rights as the other. And Gladstone made that abundantly clear, that you cannot treat constituent parts differently, and therefore, as a consequence, the rights that have been conferred to Ireland over their constitutional future must also be given to Scotland. So that was the thrust of it. I mean, on a personal level, when I was drafting the speech, coming across the words of Gladstone was pretty incredible, and also there was a really useful line from the MP from Caithness at that time, which really asked the question: well, what's the remedy to be then? Because this can't go on. This nonsense of brinksmanship and who's going to blink first. The Scottish people deserve so much more than that, and so bringing all of that history into the chamber and forced to support the arguments I was making was really, I thought, very powerful. It was really quite special for me as an individual, but it's no less than the independence movement deserve. the independence movement deserves to have the representation that I was asked to give them when I was elected. That I wasn't asked to go to Westminster and dot the I's and cross the T's of Tory policy that we didn't vote for. So the detail of it for me is utterly irrelevant other than the consequences. And so to be able to make the case cogently and firmly, I think that's what the independence movement wanted. And I was very grateful to Angus, Douglas and Joanna to join Kenny and myself and Margaret Ferrier from the SNP on the face of the bill, and indeed to the other MPs who came along to support the motion. That's what people want to see. They want to see the SNP and the Alpa Party working collaboratively with the sole ambition of securing independence. That's what I've always been about. My reason for speaking out about GRA was entirely because I thought it would damage the case for independence, and I was proven right. And sometimes you've just got to stick to your guns, stick to your principles, and believe that what you are doing is ultimately the right course of action, and that it will bear fruit further down the line. And I think this week we began to see that change, and I welcome anybody from any party who is prepared to stand alongside us to make the case for Scotland, because the case for Scotland is absolutely robust.
Absolutely. I've got to say that from my point of view, your speech, sir, of course, and what you were doing was fantastic. But for me, which gave me almost, or probably the greater pleasure, was to see another, was it 13 SNP MPs sitting behind you, supporting. That brought joy to my heart. I thought, at last, as you say, here we go. This is what we're all about. Never mind the other stuff. So that gave me a great deal of joy. On this theme, Eva, of what Neale's talking about, during Brexit, we had Geoffrey Cox, who was the Attorney General in England, and others, and Ian Murray and Theresa May, and God knows who else, all saying, well, there's no other treaty in the world where when one party wants to leave, the other party can stop them. With a bit of the blot of it said, except for viewers in Scotland. But it's these very people who were shouting about the sovereignty of the Parliament of Westminster, the sovereignty of the United Kingdom, are the very same people, Eva, who try to ignore the sovereignty of the Scottish people.
Absolutely. Can I say a personal thank you to Neale and my gratitude for his conduct this week. It was fantastic.
Absolutely.
A shiver ran up my spine watching and listening live, and there was a lump in my throat, and I was punching the air thinking, thank God somebody has been able to rewrite history, and that shudder that ran around the Scottish benches finally found a spine to run up, and it was yours, Neale Hanvey, so thank you for that. It's what Scotland needs, men of your mettle, men and women who are prepared to go there and do the job that they were elected to do, and who will take on the might of the British establishment and say, nobody has the right to draw a march on this nation and say, thus far and no further will you go. We cannot be dictated to by the Little Englanders and by the Unionists and by the Tories, whether they're blue or red or yellow, who try to tell us that Scottish democracy rests in Westminster when we know it lies with the people of this great country. It is being restored slowly but surely, and by goodness, Neale, your efforts this week in bringing together people from the SNP along with yourself, and Margaret as a now independent, are such a sight for sore eyes. Long may it continue. You can hear and you can feel the enthusiasm and the hope, the real optimism in the Scottish independence movement again, that there is actually going to be a Scotland united where we're all playing for the same jersey and we're not falling into disparate, different teams of people fighting against each other. We're fighting as one this time, and good on you for being in the vanguard, Neale.
Thank you so much.
Yvonne, great, we can see you now. My friend, lovely to see you joining us. I'm just checking the menu here to see what I fancy to eat, but I'm not quite sure. But your heart must have been like myself and Eva's and all our viewers probably lifted, listening to our Neale here, giving it big licks in the Parliament.
Well, it was great hearing an MP, a Scottish MP in Westminster, talking about independence. That was the first thing. The second was the unity, the outbreak of unity. And I'm just wondering what he's got planned next. Don't tell me, this is more exciting than the conclusion to Happy Valley, which has got everybody gripped.
Don't tell me the end yet.
Neale is just ratchets up the tension, and I've started watching BBC Parliament Channel again to see what's coming next. So it was great to see unity among Scottish MPs, the subject being independence, and what an inspiration. I think we can take a back seat now on GRR. Today, of course, Posey Parker is holding her rally in Glasgow, in St. George's Square. And I think we can, as I can't remember who it was, whether it was Eva or Neale said, it's time to hand the baton over. And we can hand the baton of women's rights over to the women in George Square, because they are more than able to get to grips with that problem. The GRR
and we can go on independence
and then focus on independence. Yes, and also to all the Aberdonians out there, I'm in your neck of the wood. It took 3 hours to get up here, and I've come up to support Charlie Abel. And we must get a victory for Charlie. We must get him elected. So to all Prism listeners, you don't have to make this 3-hour journey I made. Just hit the telephones, call your friends, call strangers using the Aberdeen code and tell them to vote for Charlie Abel. And also, by the way, on the way up from Jedburgh, we crossed 2 motorway bridges, and I salute those hardy souls who put out the salt tyres in a row and encouraged motorists to toot and bleep. And, people are doing whatever they can for independence. And to see these, as I say, hardy souls standing across the motorway bridge, waving the saltire, just wanting freedom, wanting independence from Westminster so much. It's really heartening. I was in the depths of despair last week, and today I'm really upbeat. But we don't get here by accident. It's because we keep on trying, keep on going, and keep on demanding independence.
I'm delighted to see it, and to stop me getting lots of letters. There's nothing to do with St. George in the square. It's not St. George's Square.
Well, I was going to say Freedom Square. And
well, you do free, but there's no saying it was after one of those German.
And if Tommy Docherty's listening, I'm sorry.
Kings, monarchs, one of them. We'll change them. Don't worry. Post-independence, we'll change those names quickly. Neale, Yvonne there's giving me my next question, a wee segue for me. What's next? What do you do next?
Well, I think first thing is, let's put it into context. So there are certain voices who have said, well, it's just a 10-minute rule bill, it'll never become law, it's a pointless exercise, blah, blah, blah. Well, that pointless exercise made it to the newspapers across the United Kingdom, into the Belfast Telegraph, into the Evening Standard in London. It was reported far and wide, similarly to the actions that Kenny and I took at Boris Johnson's penultimate PMQ. These are important activities. chipping away and making the case has to happen. Sitting on your hands and getting comfortable in Westminster achieves nothing for Scotland. You have to, I have embraced the discomfort in Westminster. I use that as fuel, if you like, because I didn't go there to be comfortable, and so that's okay for me. I'm quite happy to feel uncomfortable. But we've got a range of initiatives that are available to us now. We need to keep the momentum going. I don't want to, give too much away, but this is not a secret plan. This is a campaign of action, and there's lots of energy that we can put behind this, quite literally, when you think about the fuel poverty that so many people are experiencing in Scotland, and the reality of how the wealth of Scotland is being stolen from under our noses while people suffer. So there are those avenues. There are international connections that can be explored to get behind that message, and there are meetings that can be sought within the Westminster establishment to make a very clear case. Look, guys, you can't keep on with this ridiculous denial of democracy, but we need to continue to build confidence in Scotland, illustrate fundamentally that independence will lead to a fairer, more prosperous country, and one that will very clearly have women's rights and protections baked into the Constitution.
Indeed, and just if I could, just one thing. I mean, you said it made it into the BBC, ITV, the mainstream media. More importantly, it made it into Through a Scottish Prism. Where the real news is. For goodness sake, you forgot us. Don't forget us.
That is
Eva,
very, very true.
Well, yeah, we had, folks, just so you know, the week before last, we had almost 10,000 viewers, and it's growing every week, so across all our platforms. So keep viewing, keep spreading the word. Eva, as Neale alludes to, that we can't all sit back and leave it to Neale and Kenny. And I've got some stuff I'm going to quote Kenny later on things like terawatts and gigawatts, and we'll come to that in a minute. But we can't all sit back here and watch Prism or read Wings or whatever. We've all got to get involved and do our bit. Many a mickle makes a muckle, as they say. We've all got to get involved to push this forward and get back on track for independence.
We each have our part to play, and we can do that in small ways. We can do it in big ways. The little conversations that mean very much are sometimes the most valuable and the most rewarding, where you're simply chatting to your next door neighbour, or the woman that sells you your newspaper, or the checkout at Tesco's. And we know within the movement the reasons why we want Scottish independence. It is, as Neale said, to make this country and its people more prosperous, and to realise the potential of all of the people of this country, so many of whom are being left behind, are falling behind, or for some, unfortunately, the system and the processes that we have seem to kick them when they're down or keep them down, and it's so very difficult to try to get back up again. So we do what we do because we know that life will be better when the economic levers are within Scottish hands, in Scottish control. The most simple of things will be so very different. When we are independent, we can have a national energy company. People will not have to worry about whether they can eat or heat. Pensioners won't have to be penny pinching. There will be no such thing as the working poor. The single people who graft hard all week and at the end of the week are having to go and stand in a queue at a food bank. But even our food banks these days are running out of resources. There are repeated pleas to fill them back up again. But we're not stuck at food banks. We've got baby banks, school clothing banks. We've now got warm banks, and we have got the ignominy, the shame, and the utter disgrace that the King is talking about opening some of his stately homes for people to go and get a heat a week out of every month. What the hell are we talking about? You know, it's shades of Marie Antoinette, qui mange de la brioche, let them eat cake. Come and sit in my big house that I stole for you, or my ancestors stole for you, and you can get a wee heat before you peasants go back out again to survive on gruel and shiver with your arms up the sleeves of the duvet. Wake up, Scotland. We need to get militant. We need a revolution, and we need to be doing it today, because the life that we've got in Scotland otherwise, by God, is an utter disgrace. So let's get that campaign well and truly on the road, and let's save Scotland's future, because it's in our hands and it's got to be done this time.
Indeed. Yvonne, I've gone on about it for a long while, that when the Supreme Court decision came out, the SNP decided to wait 119 days before discussing it. We're now down to 42 days before they discuss it at their special conference. This is the time where we need to get everyone to get in touch with their local SNP, MP, MSP, councillor and say, get behind Neale's bill, support the campaign, unite the clans, for want of a better word. Let's stop the nonsense. I offer the hand of friendship out now to anyone and everyone who's in favour of independence. Let's let bygones be bygones. Let's get united for the cause and the cause of Scotland. Isn't that the way forward?
Well, yes, unity is the key, but the trouble is the SNP is weighted down by a legacy of waste, lack of innovation, lack of inspiration. You know, they've spent 7 years on the failed GRR bill, and, you know, no wonder they're in a state of disrepair. But unity is the key. And, you know, if Neale can extend the hand of friendship to that cabal in Westminster and make it work, all credit to him. And it was astonishing, and it was very encouraging. And so, yes, you know, that is the way forward, as Eva said, a united Scotland. That's the only way we're going to get away from the ball and chain in Westminster.
Neale, this week as well, I was a bit disconcerted when Stephen Noon, who was a big strategist in 2014, came out with a solution which was to wait for the next general election in UK, hope that the Labour Party got a minority victory, and then that the SNP could offer support in return for a Section 30 gold-plated referendum in 2027 or 2028. I can't say I could get behind that.
No.
We can't wait till 27, 28.
No. You know, the people in Scotland are already living through the most economic deprivation that the UK has faced since the 1930s. So, you know, they're already in dire straits. We can see all of the money being channeled off into the hands of well-connected Tories and corporations, whether it's the oil and gas or renewable sector. Our wealth is being taken from us through those channels. And the UK government, and I'm sorry, but whether it's Labour or Tory, I don't really see a huge amount of difference when it comes to neoconservatism and the neoliberal policies. So, you know, the amount of money that was taken out of the public purse under the guise of COVID contracting is absolutely astounding. And it would have covered the teacher strikes, the nurses strikes, the rail worker strikes, all of those decent pay settlements for people who just want to do a decent day's work and get a decent day's pay and not have to worry about where the next meal's coming for their children. But, you know, there was a worker, a civil service worker chatting on one of the news channels yesterday when they were on strike. And she was saying that she's constantly in overdraft. She can't afford to go to the cinema or the pub or a show or anything like that. She is in, a reasonably decent paid role in London, but she can't afford. There's no way they can save. There's no way they can have any kind of pleasure activity. This is Dickensian stuff. And for anyone to say, put your trust in Gordon Brown's idea, I mean, it just leaves me speechless because, Gordon Brown may mean well, but he has absolutely no authority or track record on delivering for the people of Scotland or the people of my constituency, for which he was the MP several incumbents ago. There's no credibility in that. So for somebody like Stephen Noon to get behind him is just, fanciful is really being kind. We need the courage, we need the dedication and commitment to push for independence. We have all of the arguments if we're willing to make them. There was another piece from Alan Smith when he was telling people who hadn't signed up to his gender ideology to get out of the SNP. And at the end of that piece, he had the temerity to say that, independence is not going to happen overnight because we haven't got answers on currency and we haven't got answers on how long it'll take to get back into the EU. And it's like, my response was, we do have answers. Some of them originate in your party, like Tim Rideout. But if you refuse to listen to the people who are doing the hard graft on this, of course you've no answers. And so that narrative has to be challenged and changed because it's simply not good enough to pretend that Scotland has a challenging argument to make. We have an absolutely rip-roaring, convincing argument to make. We just need people with the courage to take it forward and go down to Westminster, bang the table and say, negotiate.
But here's another one on something on Neale's side. Angus Robertson came out this week and he was saying, when you vote for independence, they do the big long, we have to get independence. Don't tell you how or why, but when you do, you'll also be voting to rejoin the EU. I found that rather presumptuous. It's a separate issue.
Well, you're more polite than me.
No, well, I don't see how you can. It's like saying, well, you voted for independence, but actually you voted for GRA and self-identification. No, we vote for independence, and then we'll talk about the EU, and we'll talk about the monarchy, and we'll talk about all these other things.
The technical term is guff. What he's saying is, we'll have this referendum, and when you vote, we'll get back into the EU, because I'm standing here havering because I've got nothing better to say. Because what he can't say is what the road to that referendum now comprises. We've had, from the SNP perspective, the 11-point plan. I don't know where we are on that. I don't know if it's been forgotten.
Minus three.
Probably. So we've had that. We've previously had Keith Brown in charge of something that never really seemed to see the light of day. We had the speech in, was it June last year, when no ifs, no buts, there's going to be a referendum on the 19th October 2023. We've had
no buts.
My good friend, but not so much, Neale's good friend now, Pete Wishart, guaranteeing there's going to be a referendum. Eva, stop your havering mince, the First Minister said, the 19th October 2023. So why don't we just utilise some of the answers, as Neale has said, that are already within SNP policy and knowledge, or within ALBA policy and knowledge, or the ISP policy and knowledge, and let's do something really mind-blowing and ensure that the First Minister delivers her promise of a Scottish Constitutional Convention made on Brexit Day, the 31st of October 2020. That Constitutional Convention can include all independence-minded MPs and MSPs, including our own Neale and Kenny. That might be one of the reasons why the First Minister's not convened it yet, but let's not be so niggardly as to think that. So in the spirit of unity, let's have the convention. Let's include within the convention civic leaders and leaders of other independence-minded parties and people who are able to prove their worth, their ability, their courage, And overall, that there is a drive in Scotland towards independence, that there are capable people with intelligence, strategy, brains, political acumen, wit, guile, conscience, and the needs and the rights and the interests of this country uppermost in their minds. We have not seen that from the party of governance in the last couple of years. Let's see it now from a united movement without delay.
Indeed, Yvonne, you were speaking about a general strike a few episodes ago. This week there was 500,000 people on strike. The streets were full, although watching the UK news, you wouldn't really have known there was much going on. But what we should also be doing, taking on from what Eva's saying about a Scottish Constitutional Convention, is our Scottish Government should be approaching the trade unions and saying, get on board, come to our convention, give us your ideas, give us what you want, what you see as the way forward on our constitutional future. We have to involve everybody, not just the Alpha Party, not just ISP, but everybody.
Absolutely right. I mean, people power is going to get us independence, and the power base for most people are the trade unions. And the general strike, well, it was pretty poor, wasn't it? You know, nothing really ground to a halt. And I think that we need, as I keep saying, to get angry, seize the moment, bring revolution to the streets, get a real general strike going, and bring Scotland to a grinding halt, because that way, that's when England will begin to appreciate its neighbour and everything that we contribute. And once they learn to respect us, then when we ask for independence, they're going to go, you know, maybe they're right, and we could be good neighbours and we could benefit from this. And that's the way forward. Bring the country to a halt and freeze everything.
Here's the thing. In France, Macron is trying to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64. Everyone in Britain going, that would be great. And you saw what happened. There's not a chance that they're going to be able to do that, because the French people are out there burning tyres, they're burning cars. The old folks are out there, the old grey, greybacks like myself are out there giving it laldy. What about their walking sticks taking out policemen? They don't take it, but you're right. We don't get angry, Yvonne. That's the problem. We just go, oh well, that's how it works. That's how it goes. We need to get angry. You're right, absolutely right. Time as usual is running on. Now, Neale, I don't know if you're aware that this week we put out a new feature we're running on the show, where we decided that we would like to hear from our viewers on topics that perhaps we don't think are important. And one of the ones I got today was we've got several folks, and we'll keep doing them. We're going to put them in, and towards the end of the show every week, we're going to have a reader's question. And this one was from Isabel Debussy, and she asked, and I've got to make a declaration here. I did put before conference a motion that was accepted, which is an annual ground rent, roof and floor tax. And the point from Isabel was very, very well put. In these times of austerity, Neale, and while everyone is, we're no money, there's huge fuel bills, time to make people pay their way. Why won't any council introduce a fair local tax, a progressive tax that would address some of these problems? Now, I'm not trying to make too much of an excuse for ALPA. We don't control any councils. But it's a fair question from Isabel. Why don't we introduce a fair tax to help with people's budgets?
Well, I think at the moment, whilst it's eminently sensible to do that, at the moment, local people and local businesses are really on the edge. So any additional tax on them is probably going to be very, very difficult to cover. That's not to say that the question's wrong. The question's right, but the circumstances that we find ourselves in, I think, are probably wrong. I think what we need to do is we need to confront a couple of things. We need to confront the reality that it's neoliberal policies that have led us to this very difficult place. It is an overwhelming celebration of greed and avarice for power that have led us to this place. It is, again, feeding back to a comment you just made there about why are people not protesting? Because they believe that they're voiceless and that their demonstration doesn't matter. And so before we get into focusing a new level of taxation at the lower echelons, if you like, so ordinary folk like us, we need to tackle the biggest problem of all, which is the addiction to greed and power from a very small minority globally who are driving the inequality and poverty and deprivation and the dreadful social circumstances that exist across the globe. And that's the real challenge, is to get a national government that's prepared to say to these big corporations and wealthy people, how much is enough? How much do you need to squirrel away in Panama or other offshore tax havens? How much do you need to feel that you've got enough? Because the likes of Bezos and Musk and all of this, whilst yes, they've been innovative and they've created an industry and the like, but really does that entitle them to skew the landscape so vastly that it has really serious harm on so many other people's lives? And I think there's a real question about how we change the narrative over greed. Greed is, as far as I'm concerned, it's a contagion. It is an addiction to something that is intangible. Because, if you've got 20 billion, 100 billion in the bank, what does that look like? What does it mean? It doesn't really mean anything. And, you've kind of got everything. So why would you feel okay about looking at the injustice that surrounds you? So I think there's a going back to some of those socialist principles of old. We're in a different dynamic, but we can't be looking at each other to tear the bread and water away from the wean's mouths. We need to take on the landowners, and these days that is the super wealthy and the corporate interests. And there needs to be a way to stop organizations like Shell pocketing billions in profit on the back of people in my constituency who are making that wealth for them. It's outrageous. I'll talk about this a bit more in the press in the coming days. But so Kirkcaldy Ice Arena is going to really struggle to pay its energy costs because their bills have gone absolutely through the roof. And I wrote to all of the energy companies who profit from their activities in Fife. None of them have been prepared to sponsor them to keep it open. So I'm having to work with Fife Council to work with their tiny crumbs of money. That's absolutely unacceptable.
Name them and shame them. Name them and shame them. That's what we've got to do.
I fully intend to do it, but we've got to. I accept the argument that's being made, but there's a bigger problem that we have to tackle first.
Eva, Neale touched on it there. Shell BP, 130 years, I believe. This is their biggest year ever. They've made £32.9 billion profit. And they're expecting to pay no tax in the UK unless there's a windfall tax by the government. They intend 32.9 billion pay no tax. I find that obscene. It is just wrong, and that is another one of the reasons why we need to be independent. If you're going to do, and as Neale's alluded to, if you're going to do business in Scotland, you're going to pay tax, or you don't do business in Scotland. Simple as that. That's got to be the way forward for our nation.
It's as plain as the nose on my face. And the conduct of Shell is shameful, But for as long as the tax system allows them to do that, then they're going to take advantage. That's human nature, and they're allowed to get away with it. And, you know, I was nodding my head in agreement with Neale talking about the greed and the avarice that there is of a few people. Traditionally in Scotland, though, we are more socialist minded than perhaps other parts of the UK might be. I think that we are egalitarian. I think that our outlook tends to be that of Jimmy Reid still, John McLean, people like that. That's what in Scotland we tend to hold as our dearest values, that you do look out for each other and you want your community to do well, you want individuals in your community to do well, and you want your society to have not just a safety net to catch people who need to be caught, but we want to build in Scotland a society where we give each other a leg up, where we learn from examples such as the Scottish Men's Shed Association. They're currently suffering from a lack of proper investment from the Scottish Government, but that association, as we all know here, is a lifesaver. It is beyond any doubt that organisations like that are able to create spaces for people to socialise, to talk, to mix, for men who might otherwise in Scotland have hidden behind a closed door, become a couch potato, sat with their head in their hands. They can go out and about, learn new skills, make new friends, and actually be reinvigorated with a hope and a zest for life. That's the kind of things that we want to see promoted in Scotland. That's the kind of country that Scotland should be well across the board, where what we're doing is rebuilding and restoring that sense of community and loyalty and goodness. You know, a kind of modern day version of what the clan system was meant to be about. That we were all Jock Tamson's bairns. It wasn't just a couple of lines from history or a man's a man for all that out a bit of poetry. There were real values that meant something and should continue to mean something. So I hope to goodness that over the course of the next year or so, Scotland can find itself able to bind together and to revisit and remember and restore the values that mean so very much. They're fundamental to human rights, to decency, and to why it is that we want to make progress. You know, I have people who live in my street, in my town, in this county, that I know are suffering ill health through poverty. And we know if you're not able to heat your home properly, your body suffers, because you can't, it's not just that you don't get a heat. Over a prolonged period of time, your body becomes run down, you become more prone to other illnesses, and you gradually start to lose the will to live, because life becomes grey. It's not a colourful tapestry anymore. It's grey and it's a dirge. And that is not the Scotland that we should be. We need to recreate hope and rebuild this country into everything that it could ever have been. And we're not going to do that furrowed to Westminster, where we're being bled dry by those such as Shell and others of similar types who want to take and take and take everything that they can, and they put back next to nothing, if not nothing at all.
You're absolutely right. We're just about to finish up. I'm going to give you the last word, Eva, Yvonne. But before I do go, I'm going to try and get Kenny on next week, Neale, to talk about what he was talking to us today about the electricity. Ladies and gentlemen, if you think the oil is generating billions and trillions, you've heard nothing till you hear Kenny on electricity and renewables, and hopefully we can do that next week. We don't have Angry Phil here, Yvonne, so I'm making a wee bit angry, Yvonne. And I want to leave with this on the tax and tax evasion and tax avoidance. Zahawi, the Tory MP, was finally sacked last week for avoiding 3.2 million in tax we know of. He avoided, and he was sacked. He didn't lose the whip. He didn't lose his job. In any other walk of life, you would have been jailed. There was a woman not so long ago, I don't know if you all remember it, she had her boyfriend staying over a while. For 6 months, she'd be getting housing benefit. She gets 6 months in jail for about 20 or 30 grand. It is disgraceful that a member of the British cabinet can avoid tax, an ex-chancellor can avoid tax and keep his job, keep the whip, and not be thrown out in disgrace That's another reason why we need to get to hell out of that bloody union.
I couldn't agree more.
I know, that's why I asked you.
Well, if the government spent as much energy pursuing people who are careless with their money or careless with their tax returns, and if they pursued these people with the same vigour that they pursue penniless welfare claimants, we would have much more benefit coming into the country. I mean, that woman who spent 6 months in prison, what did we get out of that other than the cost of keeping her in prison? It's there's no justice, and if people want to continue being part of this union, that means they're signing up basically to accept being a second-class citizen. This is a crazy, crazy world, and with Labour, we would be no better off. There's nothing that Westminster has to offer us. There's no benefit of being down there other than to watch Neale pull his latest stunt. But, you know, there's just absolutely, we get absolutely nothing from Westminster other than pain, hardship and heartache. And it has to come to an end.
Indeed. On that note, we'll finish. I would just say Labour and Tory, two cheeks of the one bum. Anyway, as I say, next week I'm hoping to get the wonderful Kenny McCaskill here to talk to you, ladies and gentlemen, about the bounty of energy that we have and we have in our hand, but we don't get any joy out of, and it's worth doing it. But I hope you've enjoyed this as much as we've enjoyed talking to you. And for those of you, remember our new feature, send in your question, we'll answer it. We might not answer it the way you like it, but we'll answer it anyway. But until we see you all next week, please, you and yours, take care.
This begs the question, why would the UK government deny democracy to Scotland but not to Northern Ireland? Could the clue lie in the words of former Prime Minister John Major from 1993's Downing Street Declaration that the UK has no selfish strategic or economic interest in Northern Ireland, whereas in the case of Scotland, the opposite is true, where with unconstrained access to our vast resources, energy is transmitted south to millions at no cost.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.